Constructive deliberation requires effective communication, and that means that all parties have to understand the worldview that is the foundation for others' perspective and desires. Therefore, constructive deliberation begins with a dialogue. The purpose of the opening dialogue is to explore the issue at hand for the purpose of the parties involved understanding each other and finding as much common ground as possible before they begin to deal with differences. This set of common understandings is the analytic frame. It is the answer to three key questions. What do we know in relation to the issue at hand? What do we need to know in order to resolve the issue, and how might we find out? And what might be contentious about this issue and why? In the process, participants consider just what needs to be within the frame so that they do not get way down the path and find they have overlooked something significant. Through this process, everyone gets a better sense of how others see the picture and what they consider to be important and/or contentious. Depending on whether the deliberation takes the form of a collaborative conversation between colleagues or a contract negotiation, the dialogue may be informal and brief, or it may be an extensive preliminary step to negotiation that is conducted by a subcommittee of representatives. Whatever the context, the purpose is the same: to establish a shared foundation of information that is mutually accepted and understood. The bigger and better the foundation, the greater the likelihood of success. So let's take a brief look at the example of a committee negotiating a school district's Pro-D policies and practices. Before the actual negotiation process, a subcommittee might look at topics such as the following to begin to establish a commonly agreed foundation for that process. The general background might include topics such as what research says about effective Pro-D, or the current policies and practices in the district, including who supports what kind of Pro-D and how, what funds can be accessed, and so on. The specific context might include topics such as the demographics of the staff with respect to age, years of experience, and so on, current directions in curriculum and pedagogy, and what sort of professional learning that might require, or a review of interesting practices in other similar districts. Now, clearly, this process could open a big can of worms, and it's unlikely that all the issues that arise can be explored in depth. So some agreement will have to be made about priorities. However, all these issues are liable to be relevant to subsequent discussion, so the more time spent in preliminary dialogue about them, the greater the chance of a well-informed, efficient, and productive negotiation. As these issues are being discussed, differences in perspective may arise. These should be acknowledged, but explored only to clarify the nature of the differences and the reasons for them. Examples might include the appropriate balance between self-direction and system direction in determining individual choices, the value of and supports for collaboration and networking in professional learning, or the felt need for and process for accountability within the system and to the community at large. Preliminary discussion of these contentious issues is liable to reveal differences in the understanding of and attitude towards terms like accountability or professional autonomy, or the difference between training, professional development, and professional learning. It's useful to acknowledge these differences and the underlying reasons for them, and if possible, to develop a glossary of agreed upon meanings. But the most important thing is to realize that different meaning may be applied to terms by different parties, and that some terms may trigger strong response. Foreknowledge of and respect for this helps to avoid misunderstanding and detrimental subcurrents in later conversations. And of course, this opening dialogue may also reveal some possibilities that all parties believe have promise. So that's the intended outcome of an opening dialogue about the matter at hand. Again, this example imagines a big formal negotiation process. In the context of a school level decision about the Pro-D for the coming year, the analytic frame might be similar in broad terms, but less extensive and more quickly dealt with due to the smaller context and probably greater degree of prior shared understanding. Now let's look at an example at the other end of the size and complexity spectrum. Two teachers co-planning a multi-week module of learning activities for their classes. If the two have worked together previously, they may have already developed a solid foundation of shared understandings. But let's imagine this is their very first attempt at co-planning curriculum. The context might include the big idea or ideas for the unit, the core learning competencies they want to foster during the unit, the specific content and available resources, the way that each of their classes have been conducted in the past, and thus what their students may be used to or may find novel when they work together, and so on. These teachers may explore their thoughts about context, pedagogy, and assessment over coffee and make no record of the discussion. And they're certainly unlikely to use a formal diagram like this one. But one would hope that they set aside some time to explore such issues before diving into the nitty gritty of their co planning, and that in this conversation, they begin by being curious about each other's approach and avoid worrying about resolving any differences that crop up until they have a good general understanding of each other's perspective and preferences. Whether constructive deliberation means a formal process of negotiation at the system level or a congenial collaboration between individuals, it should begin with a dialogue that establishes shared understandings, develops common ground, identifies areas of difference that may be vexing. This investment of time makes for more efficient discussion later on and develops the personal relationship and trust that is vital whether the deliberation process is a formal negotiation or an informal collaboration.